Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for joining us in this conversation. Learning to speak about diversity is uncomfortable, but it is critical for leaders who want to build inclusive workplaces. Indeed, there is no playbook for standing face to face with inequity, injustice, and oppression while running a business or organization. The only way to address this is the oppressions related to racism, sexism, and other forms of injustice at the workplace is to be open to experiencing this discomfort in an honest and forthright way. But how do we ask the right questions? How do we really go beyond the jargon? We will try to discuss this. My first question is to Nitin. It is said that variety is the spice of life, right? And diversity is another word for variety. How do you think it can enhance or flavor the world that we live in?
Well, firstly, thank you so much for having me. And I think it's, I must say that I was very inspired by the previous conversation that happened here. So Hina and Ashwini, I must say that, it was personally very inspiring to hear both the work that you're doing. And I think it actually, variety is actually a perfect example of the fact that we want to do something different every day, right? So when you talk about variety or when you talk about diversity, happiness and true meaning comes from the fact that people want to do something interesting every day in their workspace. I think for me, variety equals diversity, and diversity is not just about gender, but it's about diversity of thought, it's about diversity of experiences, it's about diversity of, everything from gender to age to disability to, and I've had the privilege of working in environments that have encouraged diversity and of working across cultures, and I've realized, I went from being I remember landing up in London a few years ago, and that was my first international experience of working overseas, and I'd always worked in India. And I remember working with somebody, with this guy who was a German in my team, and I remember our first review happening with him, and I was giving him feedback. And I said, "Do you have any feedback for me?" And he turned over, and he had like 30 things on that page to basically tell me. So, so I think the point that I wanted to make was that diversity of thought, diversity of culture, diversity of just experiences, and everything that we go through really encourages firstly a very innovative work culture, but I think also makes really the spice of life. So something that's very close to my heart.
Right. Numbers don't lie, actually. A Deloitte report, which was released in March 2024, just recently, says that the number of board seats held by women across Indian companies has increased gradually over the past few years from what it was earlier to 18.3% across board in 2023. But surprisingly, that still doesn't really match up to the 23.3% number of seats that is held by women across boards globally. That's quite, disappointing. Naiyya, I want to come to you. How do you think we can bring this parity? And this has been a conversation that we always have. Why we don't have more women in the boardroom?
So thanks for having me here, Nasrin. And I just want to also echo what Nitin said. Hina, Ashwini, fantastic conversation. And Ashwini, when you were talking especially, I was reminded of my mother, because she used to work in the infrastructure space, in the services. So I'm a services kid. I've seen some of what you described firsthand. It's been the subject of multiple conversations growing up. So more power to you, really. And you've really carved a way for many, many women. But coming to this again, I want to actually replay my mother's experience, because she's also been an independent director on multiple boards. And I'm actually starting my first independent directorship in the coming month. I have been, of course, on boards of companies I founded, but this is going to be totally new to me. If you just go back a little bit, right, this is where I think there's one very big positive, which is the power of legislation, right? I'm a former lawyer. And I think sometimes, we talk a lot about the role that laws can play in actually impacting societal change. And I think this has been a great, great step in actually at least mandating a woman on, on a board, right? And having that woman's voice at least be represented, right? But the flip side to it is that, society is typically slow to catch up with law always, right? Even progressive legislation. So if you look at it, if you look at the number of women CEOs, of the top 100, 500 companies in India, right? That number is less than 2%. So if you really think about it, if we don't have women at the leadership levels who are calling the shots, the boards that are supposed to work with them as partners and advise and guide them will not be representative of the leadership. So I think that needs to change. And I think a big leveler I've said this before, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm an irrational optimist. I think a big leveler is actually entrepreneurship. I'm seeing more and more women founders now come to the forefront, fundraise effectively, build amazing teams, build their boards that actually support and know who they are as leaders. And I think that narrative, at least in certain segments, is changing. But I think in mainstream corporate India, there are a few trailblazers. There aren't enough, I would say, yet. That needs to change.
Do you think there is a certain kind of unwillingness?
Unwillingness to change? I don't actually think so. I think, yes, in certain contexts, yes. But I think overall, I'm also seeing, I think, a very positive sentiment. And, I was speaking yesterday at another event, and, the data is out there. Women-led companies do perform very, very well. I mean, they're smaller in number, but they perform much better on multiple metrics: financial, operational, psychological safety, team retention, shareholder value, than a lot of other male-run companies. And I don't want to generalize. This is a smaller sample set I'm talking about, but the data is out there. So I think what is changing now and what is very positive is when you look at the flow of funds. And that's really where it all comes down to, right? When you look at public markets rewarding companies that are well-run with not diversity, but actually inclusive voices at the leadership level, they reward them much better, right? When you look at companies that are responsibly run with, many times a very strong leadership in place that is empathetic to the team as well, you get rewarded both by private investors as well as by public markets, right? So I think money is flowing in that direction more and more. And I think that will then set the narrative right.
Few more years from now, I hope.
Few more years from now, but I'm very positive.
Right. Ahana, I want to come to you now. And when employers can cast a wider net, the talent pool becomes larger. And the resources, of course, has to be given equally. How do you create an environment where equal opportunity is given for every employee?
Firstly, thank you so much for having me. I have to say this has been such an inspiring evening already. Naiyya and I, we were discussing and we were clapping for every winner. So thank you for inspiring all of us here. I would say let's take a step back first. And I will tell you that, when we talk about opportunities, of course, as an employer, you want to give an opportunity to someone, but there's also someone at the receiving end. And I think the first question which we need to answer is the dream gap. And I'll give you my example. I grew up in a very small city of Rajasthan called Bharatpur. Their parents had different dreams for their daughters, and they had different dreams for their sons. Of course, for their sons, they wanted the best-in-class education, but of course, for girls, it was shaadi kar lo, settle ho jao. Now, imagine a young working professional, a female working professional. She has grown up with that conditioning that the goal is to take care of the house, the goal is to be a complete woman. Now, when you are competing in this workspace, the dream, the hunger, and I'm not saying it's missing, but we have to start from there. We have to make sure that they are seeing the women CEOs, they are seeing the change makers, they are seeing women in government, in offices, everywhere, so that the dream gap doesn't exist. So I think first and foremost, even if you can create an ecosystem at office, and I'll be very honest here, as a founder of Open Secret, sometimes I have these hard conversations. I say, why are you quitting? They said, no, I'm getting married, I want to quit. It's just extremely hard. So until and unless we really address the social conditioning, I think it's very hard for all of us to make a difference. So that's why I want to be very honest and say, first, we really need to ensure that they're allowed to dream big. and we give them the wings to fly. Now, the second thing I would say, it's extremely important. We talk about diversity and we talk about inclusion. It starts with the leadership. And I really hope that all of us who are sitting in the room, they're not doing it as a tick box exercise. I have seen, and I've been in companies in the US where it's like an agenda item which you are trying to tick box. I think it's extremely important. People like us, I feel I'm such a privileged person on this platform, from Bharatpur to IIT Bombay to Harvard Business School. If I don't think about it, if I don't make a difference, who will? So I think bringing diversity, making equal opportunity, it should not be a choice for all the people who are sitting in the room. We should treat it as a responsibility. And that's something which I feel that starts from the leader, and then we really need to create equal opportunities. I'll give you another example. So at Open Secret, we have, we call it, we're on the mission of unjunking. So we unjunk packaged foods in India. And when I was starting Open Secret, I had this vision that, I'm going to create a product, फिर उसको contract manufacturer को दे देंगे, we'll just focus on marketing. But one thing which was very clear that I really wanted to employ women, because if you truly want to empower them, if you truly want to give them responsibility, make them financially independent. I visited so many factories in Bhiwandi. None of those smaller contract manufacturers even had a toilet for women. And that day I decided that, we're going to make our own small factory in Bhandup. And there right now, if you come and visit our factory, majority of products are being made by women. And I think that
deserves a round of applause.
And I think that's something we all need to commit. And we need to have leaders who truly, passionately care about this topic. And we need to treat it as a responsibility and then make a difference.
Right. Moving on to Nitin. See, we are talking about diversity and inclusivity, but we can't really leave this discussion without talking about culture, because that's where it starts from. And coming from a big company, how do you really imbibe that culture where we feel included?
So, I think actually she said a lot of it right now, which is that firstly, that culture of inclusion starts at the top, and it has to start by leaders. I've had the distinct privilege of working very closely with two very strong female leaders whom you would have all heard of. One was, of course, Naina Lal Kidwai, and the second one was Zareen Daruwala in Standard Chartered. And I had a famous slogan for them, which is that they were both unstoppable forces of nature. When they decided that something had to happen, it used to happen. Right? And this was despite the fact that you have these large behemoth organizations, you've got multiple power centers all across the globe. And I think therefore change or actually being able to adapt to this within organizations starts with three things. The first thing is all about accountability. It's about accountability yourself as a leader, but also about trying to empower that accountability all the way down the line, which is that people have to be accountable. And it's not about actually an agenda and a tick box, even though that slide also comes in every presentation. So I know in my reviews, oh, by the way, even my current boss, who's my global head of wealth management, is also a lady. So I should not be forgetting that. But so I think the first one is about accountability. I think the second one is about transparency, actually, because it can very quickly just become an agenda, and it's easier said than done. So I think about having that transparency, both in terms of your policies, both in terms of what you're doing, both in terms of how you're implementing it, and in the communication that you're making. And I think the third one is really about engagement, and that's something that actually we do very closely, and something that's very close to my heart. So I think in 2018 I had the privilege of being the leader of the ERG, or our employee resource group that we'd set up for LGBTQ employees. And that was a very enriching experience because, despite whatever, that was something that I, at least in my cocooned environment, hadn't experienced previously. And when I look at places like Barclays today, ERGs are so powerful because these are run by employees. And, if when I was thinking about what we do in Barclays, I actually wanted to just say ditto to whatever Hina was talking about, because she counted off all of the statistics, and I said, okay, that's very cool. But I think that's actually a perfect example of how you drive change and within large organizations.
Right. Naiyya, I want to come to you on this. An inclusive environment really is very fulfilling for all of the employees. An employee feels valued. But at the same time, there are a lot of organizations which still lack this basic requirement. Why do you think so?
I think, and if you think about, I think progressive, the sort of the corporate environments that we're all building out today, right? Just kind of stepping back and looking at the kind of team members we are hiring and we're bringing on, we're nurturing and who are playing leadership roles, they are talking the narrative of authenticity, right? They are all talking about, can we be who we are and show up the way we are at work, right? We don't have to put up a facade, we don't have to put on a mask, we can literally be who we are, and we can play to our own distinctive strengths. It's a very different paradigm from, let's say, when I was starting off my career, and, I was told to be a certain way or behave a certain way. Today we're celebrating these differences. We're celebrating what makes you unique and what makes you special. And in fact, it's not just a survival tactic, it's actually a thriving tactic for organizations. And organizations who do not recognize that are going to lose the plot. They're not going to win. It's very clear. The writing is on the wall. The second thing, I really want to call this out. At the Glamm Group, we're extremely particular about, of course, creating security, psychological security, but also standing for causes, right? And that's really important because when team members believe that the organization has a mission, right, that it serves, which is larger than just the pursuit of profit, right? It becomes a very different narrative even within the organization. I want to talk about 3 initiatives very quickly, what we do, right? One is something very close to my heart. I mean, I am 8 months pregnant, so it's even closer to my heart right now, which is the Mompreneur initiative. The idea there was to build the largest platform along with Startup India and a couple of other amazing partners for mompreneurs in India. The numbers are really startling. We have let's say, of the 20-odd million entrepreneurs, give or take, like different level of entrepreneurs, about, 20% of them are actually moms who are starting off their businesses, right? And I'm talking about all scale of entrepreneurs, right, across India. And that's a large number, but there's no one initiative that really addresses their needs at scale. So what we've done is we've, of course, created a show, the Mompreneur Show, where we celebrate the stories of top leaders who happen to be moms, but equally a mompreneur platform where we are actually funding as well as supporting aspiring and ambitious mompreneurs with funding, grants, etc. So that's one piece, and that's become a really large piece of who we are. The second piece was we did it a couple of years back where we profiled 100 top women entrepreneurs across India, and the rationale for that actually came out of a personal experience where I was doing a small angel check, and in part of the the syndicate meeting, there were no women in that particular list of entrepreneurs we should back, and I was like, where are the women? And I was told, but there are no women. I'm like, no, but there clearly are women entrepreneurs are building. And, that list has actually become, I think, quite a large part of, what we support. I mean, the stories championing, you can be what you can see. How do we bring more stories of women out there? And the third initiative is, of course, we talk about the checklist and the checklist manifesto on diversity. But, honestly, what you measure is what matters, right? We do measure very, very aggressively, very transparent about these numbers. We have a 65% women in our workforce, for the scale of company we're at, for the fact that we're a unicorn. It's one of the very rare outliers, unfortunately, today in India, to have that level of women at different roles and across hierarchies, if you will, right? And that's something that we measure obsessively at every level. And we keep on thinking about how to do better and better. So I think these are the 3 things when people see this, right? They see the outside commitments, the mission that it's a broader purpose and we serve just the group level for profit. And number 2, when they see internally and they see more of us, right? Present in boardrooms, present in conversations, in team building sessions, etc. That is really what creates a sense of inclusiveness versus any sort of pity talk.
Absolutely. Nitin, if I want to ask you about the hiring practices, because inclusivity actually starts from the hiring practices and then, of course, flows into the company's policy. At Barclays, do you have any instances where you can share about the practices that you follow in hiring?
So, I spoke a few pieces about how we make people feel included at work and the ERGs, etc. I think one is, of course, having clear targets that we've set. And to be frank, that helps because you need to focus attention around the fact that you need to look at diversity of of candidates, because actually typically that answer happens saying that there's nobody, right? So there's actually a process that drives people to start thinking through that, and I think that's very key, right? It's okay to say that you can be gender blind and you need to find the best candidate, and that's a wonderful line that is utopian at times. But I think just forcing people to think beyond and actually trying to drive that is key. I think the second one that actually Hina also mentioned earlier is about the organization making an effort to actually go out into the street and say that this is key and these are our targets. That in itself puts a huge amount of focus. So for example, at our level, and unfortunately it's not 65%, I would love it to be that, but senior directors and MDs within our firm globally is about 33%. Which is a large number, and which is something that we are actually trying to grow as well. But yeah, it's still work in progress.
Okay, one last question before we wrap up, and this is to Ahana. The BRSR norms, which is mandated by SEBI, it says that the 100 companies, the 1,000 companies by market cap, they need to follow certain norms which are in the BRSR norms. How do you think a smaller company in size and scale can really fit this work culture in their work environment to probably get into the BRSR norms?
I think first thing I would say, it should not be a norm based on which I want to hire women. So let's just make it very clear. I think as Naiyya mentioned that if you have a diverse workforce, the companies perform much better. So I would firstly definitely say that diversity results in better performance, and I think that should be a driving factor, and that's something at open secret, from a leadership position, even as I was mentioning at the shop floor, that we have women leaders, because I do believe that, and not just as he was mentioning, diversity in terms of gender, but diversity in terms of thought, diversity in terms of skill sets, and all of that should definitely stay. But at the same time, I would also say that it's extremely important to not just talk about hiring, but also talk about retention. Because a lot of times I've realized that the ecosystem that we create, the definition of merit is a bit flawed. If all the promotions are happening based on merit and that definition hasn't changed for decades, and people are being rewarded for a certain behavior, I think that is something which we need to be very conscious about. I was just chatting with Naiyya and I was saying to her that, we have a certain personality type for a male leader and we have a certain personality type for a female leader. In fact, there was a case study at Harvard Business School where people described a leader as confident, as authentic when it was a male leader, but they described as like aggressive, I don't like this leader, don't want to work with this leader when she was a female leader. So it's extremely important that when you're hiring someone, you're also creating an environment where someone like me, I would say I'm aggressive at work, is also acceptable, versus someone who might be a soft-spoken leader. So let's talk about both hiring as well as retention, and let performance, let merit be the reason for all of us to hire more women in the workforce, not norms. Of course, norms are great. I'm not saying that we don't need legislation, but I just also want to ensure that this is a very merit-based decision that we want to make.
All right. On that note, thank you so much for sharing the panel with me, and all your insights were really helpful to form an idea about how you all are running your company, be it of a small size or a large one like Barclays. Thank you so much once again.
Thank you, Nasrin.